In the middle of a war-torn desert valley, surrounded by smoke and the echo of distant artillery, a small green tent stood almost forgotten. It wasn't a command post or a weapon storage, just an old canvas field tent, faded and patched so many times it barely looked military anymore. Soldiers called it the quiet tent. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It always blows my mind how far these videos travel. Inside it worked a young woman named Clara Hayes. To most of the troops, she was just the tent girl, someone who handled supplies, water, and the occasional paperwork. She never wore a rank insignia, never carried a gun, and rarely spoke unless necessary. Her presence seemed out of place in a base filled with hardened men. Her hands were small, her voice soft, and her uniform always too big for her frame. She moved quietly through the chaos, refilling canteens, bandaging small scrapes, and delivering food when others were too exhausted to move. No one really knew who she was. Some said she was an assistant clerk from headquarters. Others joked she was someone's cousin who got lost on her way to the Red Cross. But none of them knew the truth. Clara was a trained combat medic, one of the youngest ever to graduate from the Army Medical Corps. She had chosen to stay anonymous, wearing no insignia and living among the enlisted men, because she didn't want special treatment, not after what had happened in her last unit. There, she had saved a dozen lives, but lost the one that mattered most, her brother, Private Tom Hayes. Now she worked quietly, hidden behind the canvas walls, doing her duty without recognition or praise. Until that night. The night everything changed. Outside the tent, thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from tanks rolling through the valley. A new offensive had begun, and the base was suddenly flooded with wounded soldiers, blood, shouting, panic. The small camp hospital was overwhelmed in minutes. And when a mortar exploded near the main medical truck, the only working treatment space left was Clara's tent. She didn't hesitate. "Bring them here," she shouted, her calm voice slicing through the chaos. The soldiers froze for a second, surprised to hear her speak with such authority. "What are you waiting for? Move," she barked again, and this time they obeyed. They started carrying in the injured, men crying out in pain, others too weak to speak. Clara tore off her outer jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. No insignia, no command, but pure instinct. She cleaned wounds, tied tourniquets, and whispered encouragement as she worked. Her hands didn't tremble. She didn't flinch at the sight of blood. When the power went out, she used a flashlight between her teeth to keep working. When bandages ran out, she tore strips from her own uniform. When morphine ran low, she rationed every drop. By dawn, her tent floor was covered in blood-soaked rags. But more than 20 men were alive because of her. And yet, when the colonel arrived at sunrise, he didn't know. He saw only a young woman in a stained uniform, slumped beside an unconscious soldier, her hands shaking from exhaustion. "Who's in charge here?" The colonel barked. Before anyone could answer, Sergeant Miller stepped forward. "Sir, we don't know her name. She's just a tent girl." The colonel frowned, scanning the chaotic scene. The injured lined up neatly, 4 lines improvised from field tubes, wounds cleaned and bandaged like a professional hospital. He knelt beside one of the men and whispered, "Who did this?" The soldier, barely conscious, murmured, the girl, saved us." The colonel turned to Clara. "You did all this?" She looked up slowly, her eyes red but steady. "They needed help, sir." The colonel stared for a long moment, then said words no one would forget. "You didn't just help them, soldier. You saved this entire unit." The sun rose over the camp like a bruise spreading across the sky, orange, gray, and heavy. The smoke from the battlefield still hung thick, and the ground outside the tents was littered with shell casings, broken helmets, and silence. Clara sat alone beside the cot of a wounded private, her hands still wrapped in blood-stained gauze. She had been awake for nearly 30 hours. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind nothing but trembling exhaustion and the dull ache of her own untreated cuts. From outside, footsteps approached, heavy, disciplined, unmistakable. The flap of the tent lifted. Colonel James Rowan stepped inside, his face unreadable. Behind him followed Sergeant Miller and two officers carrying a wooden box. Clara immediately stood, out of habit more than respect. Her knees almost buckled, but she steadied herself. The colonel surveyed the tent again. His sharp eyes caught every detail: the improvised 4 stands made from rifles, the orderly rows of wounded men. The makeshift sterilization station Clara had built from ration heaters and mess kits. It looked like chaos to anyone else. But to a soldier who had seen real field hospitals, it looked like a miracle. "You did all this," the colonel said quietly. Clara didn't meet his eyes. "They needed someone, sir. I just saved 32 men," he interrupted. There was silence. Even the faint groans of the wounded seemed to fade for a moment. Sergeant Miller stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, with all due respect, she's not even on the medic roster." "We checked. There's no female medic assigned to this sector." The colonel turned back to Clara. "So who are you really?" She hesitated. Then, with a small sigh, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, creased, almost falling apart. She handed it to him silently. The colonel opened it. Army Medical Corps. Certification, Specialist Clara Hayes issued. 2 years ago, Unit 43rd. Infantry, Delta Squad status. Field Medic, active. The colonel's expression softened. "You've been active all this time? Where have you been?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Here, sir. Just helping." He frowned. "You could have been promoted, transferred. You could have led a full medical team." She shook her head. "No, sir. Not after Delta." The name hung heavy in the air. Delta Squad. Everyone had heard of it. A unit that had been ambushed 2 years ago. Half the men lost. The colonel's tone gentled. "You were there?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "My brother was." The colonel exhaled, understanding dawning. "Private Tom Hayes." She nodded once, swallowing hard. After a long pause, he said quietly, "He was one of mine. Brave man. Died trying to save his team." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "He made me promise. If I ever served, I'd save as many as I could, no matter what it costs." For a moment, no one spoke. The colonel looked at the faces of the men sleeping on the cots, alive, breathing because of her. Then he opened the wooden box. Inside lay a medal, the Silver Star, the Army's 3rd highest award for valor. He took it out carefully and stepped toward her. "Specialist Clara Hayes, for extraordinary courage under fire, for saving the lives of your fellow soldiers without regard for your own safety. You are hereby awarded." Before he could finish, Clara lifted a hand. "Please, sir," she whispered. "Don't." The colonel blinked. "Don't what?" "Don't give me that medal." Miller frowned. "Ma'am, this is an honor." Clara's eyes glistened. "It's not mine. It's theirs. The men who didn't make it back. The ones I couldn't save. I don't deserve a medal for surviving them." The colonel studied her, the quiet defiance in her posture, the deep grief behind her calm. Finally, he said softly, "You may not want it, but you've earned it." She shook her head again, gently. "Sir, I didn't do it for a medal. I did it because I couldn't let anyone else die like my brother did, waiting for help that never came." He held her gaze for a long time, then nodded slowly and lowered the medal, but he didn't put it back in the box. Instead, he set it on the small wooden crate beside her, where she kept her bandages and syringes. "Then keep it," he said, "not as a reward, but as a reminder for every life you've already saved." And with that, he turned and walked out. Clara stared at the medal for a long time. The silver surface caught a flicker of sunlight, reflecting softly against the tent walls. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, "For you, Tom." Then she tied her hair back, turned toward the next wounded soldier, and kept working, because the war wasn't over, and neither was she weeks past. The sound of war never really faded, only shifted, sometimes near, sometimes far, but always there. The field tent became something of a legend across the front lines. Soldiers began calling it the miracle tent. Men who entered it half dead often came out alive. Rumors spread like wildfire about a quiet girl with no rank who worked day and night, patching up the broken and the bleeding. Some swore she never slept. Others said she prayed over the wounded before treating them, but Clara never paid attention to the whispers. Every sunrise looked the same. She woke before the others, cleaned her instruments, replaced what supplies she could, and prepared for the next wave of casualties. The medal the colonel had left her stayed untouched on that same wooden crate, glinting faintly in the dim light. Sometimes, when she was alone, she'd catch herself looking at it, not with pride, but with a deep ache that she couldn't quite name. And then, one day, everything changed again. The battle that morning was supposed to be a simple push, one last operation before rotation. But war doesn't care about plans. It was chaos. Heavy artillery tore through the valley. Communication lines went dead. Within minutes, the front units were cut off. Clara's tent filled faster than ever before. Too many bodies, too little space, too little time. Her hands were covered in blood that wasn't her own. Her back burned, her throat raw from shouting for supplies that never came. Still, she worked. One soldier grabbed her wrist weakly, eyes glassy. "Am I going to make it?" Clara pressed his hand gently against his chest. "Yes, you are. Just hold on for me, okay?" But deep down, she knew he wouldn't. Outside, explosions roared closer. The earth trembled. And then, through the dust, came an unmistakable sound, the rhythmic thud of boots. A group of medics from headquarters stormed in, their leader shouting, "We're evacuating the field." Everyone moved to the convoy now. Clara shook her head. "We can't move them yet. They'll die if we do." He yelled back, "We don't have a choice." Enemy armor's less than a mile out. Before Clara could respond, someone else stepped through the tent flap, limping. Covered in dust and blood. Colonel Rowan. His uniform was torn. One arm in a sling, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Everyone out," he ordered. "Evac trucks are waiting." "Move!" Clara turned furious. "Sir, we can't leave them." He looked at her, really looked, and saw the fear, the exhaustion, and the unbreakable determination in her face. Then, slowly, he said, "You're right. We can't." He dropped to one knee beside her and began helping, pressing gauze to a soldier's wound, calling out vitals, doing everything he could despite his injury. Together, they worked side by side as shells fell in the distance. Hours blurred into minutes. And then, the next blast was too close. The world exploded in fire and dust. When Clara opened her eyes, she was on the ground. The tent was half collapsed, smoke everywhere. Her ears rang. The colonel lay a few feet away, unmoving. "Sir," she cried, crawling toward him. She checked for a pulse. Weak, but still there. He coughed, blood on his lips. "Did we get them out?" She nodded through tears. "Most of them. Yes." He smiled faintly. "Good. That's what matters." She pressed a bandage against his chest, her voice trembling. "Hold still, sir." "I can." He placed his hand over hers, stopping her. "No, you can't save everyone, Clara." She shook her head violently. "I can try." He gave a weak chuckle. "You sound just like your brother." Her breath caught. "You knew Tom?" The colonel nodded slowly. "Bravest soldier I ever met. He told me once. If I ever met his sister, I'd know her by the way she never gives up." Tears rolled down her cheeks. The colonel coughed again, his hand trembling as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small folded envelope, the paper stained with dirt. "Take this," he whispered. If I don't make it, deliver it to headquarters." She clutched it tightly. "You'll give it yourself." He smiled faintly. "If not, tell them what you did here. Tell them what you really are." And then, in the last moment before his eyes closed, he whispered, "You saved more lives than I ever could." When the medevac arrived, Clara refused to leave his side. She rode with him all the way back to base, holding his hand, whispering prayers. But the colonel didn't wake again. 3 days later, Clara stood outside the command tent as the sun sank low. Her uniform was clean now, but her eyes were hollow dot and her hand was the letter, the one he had given her. With trembling fingers, she opened it to Command HQ. "If you are reading this, I am no longer in command. I leave this note to recommend immediate promotion and commendation for Specialist Clara Hayes, who has saved more soldiers than any officer under my command. She is the finest medic I have ever known. She hides her rank not out of pride, but out of grief, and yet she carries herself with more courage than any man I've led. She doesn't need recognition, but the Army needs to remember her name." Colonel James Rao and Clara read the letter twice, then folded it gently and pressed it against her chest. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry. Not for the fallen, not for her brother, but for the man who saw her, truly saw her, for who she was. The next morning, the field tent was gone. No one saw her leave. No transfer papers, no orders. Just her tent, empty except for one thing on the wooden crate lying beside the untouched silver star, was a simple note written in her handwriting. "Keep saving them. That's all that matters." That's the end of today's story, but I hope it stays with you for a while. If something in it spoke to you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share your thoughts. It's your comments that keep me inspired to make the next one.